A typewriter key strikes in the dark, then another, and another, until the page begins to look less like a report than a confession. Across the paper, black ink swallows names, dates, and places. A blurred stamp reads classified, then disappears under another layer of redaction. For decades, we have imagined that the deepest government vaults contain evidence of visitors from distant stars. But a stranger possibility lingers at the edge of certain stories. What if some of the people questioned by border agents, police officers, intelligence clerks, and military analysts were not visitors from space at all? What if they were versions of us, arriving from histories almost like our own, but not quite? This is not a claim of proof. It is a journey through reports, legends, disputed memories, and fragments that refuse to sit comfortably inside ordinary explanations. 10 files, some historical, some modern folklore, some drawn from real declassified material, all circling the same quiet question. Can a person slip between realities and still look completely human? It began, according to the most enduring version of the story, with a passport on a customs desk in Tokyo. The year was 1954. A well-dressed man arrived at Haneda Airport carrying documents that seemed, at first glance, perfectly ordinary. His passport had stamps. His papers were organized. He spoke several languages. He claimed to be from a country called Taured, and when officials asked him to point to it on a map, he placed his finger near Andorra, between France and Spain. There was only one problem. Taured did not exist. The story has been retold so often that it now lives somewhere between urban legend and modern myth. The details shift from version to version. In some, the man is taken to a hotel room under guard and vanishes overnight. In others, his documents disappear with him. What remains constant is the image of a traveler who was not lost geographically, but historically. The man from Taured matters because the ordinary details are what make the story endure. A passport, a business trip, a confused official. Not a monster, not a miracle, just bureaucracy meeting a reality it cannot file. And if the story is only folklore, the question still survives. Why are we so haunted by the idea of a person arriving with paperwork from a world that never happened? Some alleged files do not begin in airports. Some begin at sea, where fog can make even familiar coastlines seem borrowed from another century. The Jorgen Thorsen incident, usually described as a Scandinavian intelligence note from the 1960s, tells of a sailor who claimed to have docked in a port that no longer existed in our recorded history. In his account, the town was active, lit, and crowded with workers. Ships moved through the harbor. Names were painted on warehouse doors. Yet when authorities traced the location, they found a place said to have been destroyed roughly 50 years earlier. As with many of these cases, the evidence is incomplete. The file, if it ever existed in official form, has never been presented in a way that can be verified. Still, the story carries a strange emotional weight, because it reverses the usual idea of time travel. Thorsen did not claim to visit the past. He claimed to come from a history in which the past had continued differently. A destroyed port still alive. A sailor with memories no map could support. A coastline that seemed to answer a question nobody had asked. The sea has always kept human records poorly. It erases footprints, swallows wreckage, and returns only what it chooses. But this story asks something more unsettling. What if some lost places are not gone everywhere? A road at night can feel like a narrow agreement between the world and the people moving through it. The Gadianton Canyon story comes from a strain of American desert lore often linked to Utah. 4 students driving through an isolated canyon, taking what seemed like an ordinary wrong turn, and emerging into a landscape that did not belong to the present. The vegetation was described as strangely colored, almost neon. The air felt different. The terrain seemed prehistoric, not in the museum sense, but in the immediate sense of a world before human naming. Some versions claim there was a police report. Others describe interviews, damaged memories, and a return route that could never be located again. The canyon itself becomes less a place than a threshold, One of those geographical uncertainties where distance seems to bend under heat, fear, and exhaustion. Deserts are fertile ground for such accounts because they make time visible. Stone layers expose ancient seas. Fossils rest beneath roads. A person driving through red rock can feel for a moment that the modern world is only a thin surface. What makes Gadianton Canyon linger is not the possibility of dinosaurs or impossible plants. It is the vulnerability of those students trapped in a car following headlights through a country that no longer obeyed the map. And if a wrong turn can become a doorway, how many thresholds have we passed without noticing? The modern cases are quieter. They do not always involve passports, deserts, or vanished ports. Sometimes they begin with an alarm clock and a woman getting ready for work. The Lorena Garcia case, widely circulated online, tells of a Spanish woman who woke to find small details of her life altered. The office where she believed she worked no longer matched her position. A relationship she remembered had shifted. Familiar objects and routines seemed to have moved by only a few degrees, enough to make the world recognizable but emotionally alien. It is easy to approach stories like this with skepticism, and we should. Memory is fragile. Stress can reshape perception. The mind can preserve certainty even when the outside world contradicts it. But the reason this case resonates is because it touches a fear many people understand. Not the fear of entering another universe, but the fear of waking up and realizing that your life no longer confirms who you believe you are. A passport from Taured can be dismissed as legend. A destroyed harbor can be treated as rumor. But a workplace that no longer remembers you feels uncomfortably close to ordinary life. In the folklore of reality slips, identity is the most delicate evidence. Documents can be forged, maps can be wrong. But what do we do with a person who insists that the life they lost was real? Then, in the early 1980s, the language changed. The Central Intelligence Agency's declassified material on the gateway process is real, and it belongs to a very different category from airport legends or desert rumors. The document explored altered states of consciousness, meditation, sound frequencies, and theories about perception and reality. It did not prove interdimensional travel. It did, however, show that official institutions were willing to study the edges of human awareness with unusual seriousness. Around that real document, another layer of speculation has grown. Stories of participants who supposedly went too far, subjects who reached a state they could not return from, outliers whose experiences were too strange to file cleanly. These claims remain unverified, but they reveal something important about the mythology of secret research. Once a government studies the mind as a possible doorway, the public imagination completes the corridor. The gateway material marks a turning point in our journey because it shifts the mystery from geography to consciousness. Maybe the doorway is not always in a canyon or an airport terminal. Maybe the stranger border is inside perception itself, where the brain builds the world moment by moment and calls the construction reality. If reality is partly experienced through the mind, then a disturbing question follows. Could a traveler slip worlds not by moving through space, but by changing the frequency of attention? Long before intelligence agencies used technical language to describe altered states, medieval England preserved a stranger tale in simpler terms. Two children, green-skinned and frightened, emerging near the village of Woolpit. The Green Children of Woolpit were said to speak an unknown language and refuse ordinary food until they discovered beans. One child reportedly died. The other survived, learned English, and described a dim homeland where the sun never shone as it did here. Historians have offered grounded explanations: lost children, famine, illness, Flemish migrants, misunderstood language, or the green tint of malnutrition. Those explanations matter. They keep the story human. Yet the tale has also been revisited by writers and modern investigators as a possible ancient account of a liminal crossing, not from another planet, but from another layer of Earth. Here, the midpoint of our journey arrives quietly. The files are not only about governments hiding information, They are about humanity repeatedly using the language available in each age to describe the same bewildering experience. Medieval villagers spoke of strange lands beneath the earth. 20th century travelers spoke of missing countries and alternate histories. Modern researchers speak of timelines, dimensions, and branching realities. The words change, but the shape of the mystery remains. A human being appears where they should not be, carrying hunger, fear, and a memory of another world. And sometimes, the saddest evidence is not an object. It is a child who cannot find the way home. Evidence, when it appears in these stories, is often disappointingly ordinary. A cassette tape, a handwritten note, a scrap of code, a coin from a country no one recognizes. The story of James Richards and everyday chemistry belongs to this category, where the impossible is said to arrive not as thunder, but as music. Richards claimed he traveled to a parallel Earth where the Beatles never broke up and returned with a tape containing songs from that other history. The album, known online as Everyday Chemistry, became a fascinating artifact of internet folklore. Listeners debated whether it was an alternate universe relic, a mashup, a clever art project, or a meditation on cultural longing. The most interesting part may not be whether the tape proves anything. It is the emotional precision of the fantasy. A world where the Beatles stayed together is not a world of strange physics alone. It is a world where loss was postponed, where friendship survived pressure, where a familiar wound in pop culture closed differently. That is what parallel reality stories often reveal. We do not only imagine different planets or technologies, we imagine different outcomes for grief. If Taured asks whether nations could exist elsewhere, Everyday Chemistry asks whether art itself might have ghost versions. Somewhere, perhaps only in longing, there is a song we almost heard. And if a tape can become a doorway, then every familiar melody may carry the echo of a life that took another road. On an Australian beach in 1948, a man was found dead with no confirmed identity and a phrase torn from a book hidden in his clothing. Tamam shud, meaning finished. The Somerton Man case is real, and for decades it attracted code breakers, historians, police, and amateur investigators. The unknown man, his missing labels, the mysterious scrap, and the debated code associated with the case formed one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. In recent years, genetic research has offered a likely identification, moving the case closer to the world of human history than legend. Yet the mythology surrounding the Somerton Man has not entirely disappeared. One speculative theory imagines that the strange letters once treated as code were not espionage at all, but coordinates for a reality jump, a notation for movement across unseen boundaries. There is no solid evidence for this interpretation. It belongs to the imaginative afterlife of the case. Still, the connection is revealing. When a person has no name, the world rushes to provide one. Spy, lover, poison victim, traveler, stranger from elsewhere. The Somerton Man reminds us that mystery often grows in the gaps left by missing records. A removed clothing label becomes a portal. A line from a book becomes a message from another world. But if identity can be reconstructed from DNA, what happens to the stories we built around the absence? Do mysteries die when solved, or do they simply move into deeper rooms? The Cold War gave the imagination a colder kind of dream. The parallel USSR experiment is usually described as a leaked KGB file from the 1970s, involving a soldier exposed to a procedure that allowed him to view a Moscow from another history. In that version of events, the Soviet Union had reached Mars by 1965, and the capital reflected a future built from different victories, different sacrifices, and different ambitions. There is no verified public record that confirms such an experiment as described, but the story feels historically resonant because the Cold War was already a contest between possible futures. Every missile silo, space launch, propaganda poster, and laboratory project carried an implied question. Whose version of tomorrow would become real? The soldier in the story is not simply seeing another Moscow. He is seeing the emotional architecture of national destiny. A country that endured hunger, war, surveillance, and sacrifice suddenly glimpses a reality where those costs led to cosmic triumph. That may be why parallel world stories so often attach themselves to governments. States are built on official timelines. They preserve approved histories, celebrate chosen victories, and bury certain failures. A parallel reality threatens that structure because it suggests history was never inevitable. If one Moscow reached Mars, another did not. If one nation became triumphant, another became afraid. And if governments ever believed such visions were possible, the next question would not be philosophical. It would be strategic. The final alleged file begins not in a laboratory, but at a border. An individual is said to have been detained carrying currency and identification from a United States of America that looked almost familiar. The money was recognizable in design but wrong in detail. The identification seemed official but did not match known formats. Most unsettling was the flag. 52 stars, arranged as if 2 additional states had always belonged to the Union. Like the Taured story, this account lives in the uncertain territory between rumor, folklore, and speculative fiction. Yet it works because borders are where reality becomes administrative. A line on a map decides who belongs, who may enter, and what documents count as truth. A 52-star flag is such a small alteration. It does not require dragons, alien suns, or rewritten physics. It requires only 2 different political decisions somewhere in the past, 2 histories absorbed into cloth. This is where the idea of a continuity protocol emerges in the mythology surrounding these cases. If a traveler arrived from a near-identical world, what would officials do? Announce it publicly and risk panic? Hide the person and study the documents? Return them, if return were even possible? The ethical question is sharper than the mystery. A traveler between realities would not be just evidence. They would be a displaced person. And before any agency could decide what to learn from them, it would have to decide whether to treat them as a witness, a threat, or a human being. Every archive has a temperature. Some rooms feel dry and procedural. Others seem to hold the cold of what was never meant to be understood. The supposed reason for hiding reality travelers is often described as containment. Not necessarily cruelty, not necessarily malice, but the fear that public certainty would fracture if governments admitted the map of existence was incomplete. A society can survive scandals, wars, and disasters. It is less clear how it would respond to proof that personal history might be negotiable. There is also the question of use. If reality leaping were possible even rarely, every state would want to know whether it could be controlled. Could information cross between timelines? Could technology be borrowed? Could defeat in one world become advantage in another? Science does not currently offer a practical doorway between realities. String theory and multiverse ideas remain complex, debated, and often misunderstood outside their mathematical contexts. Still, the language of extra dimensions has given modern culture a framework for imagining what older generations called fairy roads, spirit realms, or cursed places. Some have linked these stories to so-called vile vortices, regions rumored to behave strangely, though the evidence is uneven and often anecdotal. The idea persists because geography has always carried mystery. Certain places feel thin. Maybe that thinness is physical. Maybe it is psychological. Maybe it is memory meeting landscape under unusual pressure. But once people believe there are thin places, they begin to ask a dangerous question. Where is the nearest one? Beneath every story of a traveler between realities is a quieter human longing. The man from Taured wants his country recognized. The sailor wants the harbor he remembers to be real. The students in the canyon want the road to return them safely to the present. Lorena Garcia wants her life to agree with her memory. The green child wants food from a world that does not understand her hunger. James Richards wants a song from a history that kept going. These are not only stories about dimensions, they are stories about belonging. Every adult knows, in some private way, the sensation of living beside an alternate life, The job we did not take. The marriage that did not happen. The city we left. The person we might have become if one phone call, one diagnosis, one accident, or one act of courage had gone differently. Parallel reality stories give that feeling a physical shape. They turn regret into geography. They turn memory into evidence. They allow us to imagine that the road not taken did not vanish, but continued somewhere beyond sight. That is why these files, real or rumored, remain emotionally powerful. They do not merely challenge physics. They challenge the loneliness of irreversible choices. The unanswered question is not only whether other worlds exist, it is whether we would know ourselves if we found one. Would another version of home comfort us, or would it reveal how fragile our own story has always been? At the end of the archive, the typewriter stops, but the last page remains unfinished. 10 files, 10 fragments, 10 ways of describing the same impossible wound in the surface of ordinary life. A passport from a country that cannot be found. A harbor that should be ruins. A canyon bright with impossible vegetation. A woman misplaced inside her own routine. A declassified study of consciousness surrounded by rumors it cannot confirm. Green children, strange music, coded death, Cold War visions, and a flag with 2 stars too many. None of this gives us permission to abandon caution. The evidence is incomplete. Some stories may be legends. Some may be misunderstandings. Some may be art, memory, folklore, or the human mind trying to describe experiences that do not fit cleanly into language. Still, the mystery matters because it asks us to look again at reality with humility. The world we trust is built from records, maps, names, habits, and shared agreement. When one piece slips, even in a story, we feel how delicate the whole structure can be. If you found a doorway tomorrow to a better reality, would you cross it? Or would you hesitate, not because of what waited ahead, but because of who and what you would leave behind? And before that question disappears, there is another trail to follow, 10 signs you are not from this original timeline. Not as proof, not as certainty, but as one more candle held up to the dark, where mystery still waits with a human face.